You get promoted on a Tuesday. By Thursday, something in you has already changed. You don't notice it, almost no one does, but the people around you do, and they notice it fast. Your voice gets a little firmer in meetings. You interrupt more. You start finishing other people's sentences before they're done. It feels like the same brain in the same body, doing the same job it did last week. But the real answer is far stranger than that. Power doesn't slowly reveal who you already were. It rewires who you are, and it does it in days, not years. In 1971, a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo wanted to test something simple. He took a group of ordinary college students. Healthy, stable, no history of violence or cruelty. He split them randomly into two groups, guards and prisoners. Then he put them in a fake prison built in the basement of a Stanford University building. He expected the experiment to run for 2 weeks. He shut it down after 6 days. Why? Because the guards, who were just normal 20-year-olds the week before, started behaving in ways that shocked even Zimbardo himself. They stripped prisoners of their names and replaced them with numbers. They forced humiliating exercises in the middle of the night. One guard, who described himself as a pacifist before the study began, became so aggressive that researchers had to intervene. These weren't cruel people pretending to be normal. They were normal people who had been handed a role, a costume, and a tiny bit of power over other human beings. That's the part that should unsettle you. It wasn't their personality that changed. It was their position. Psychologists have a term for part of what happened in that basement: deindividuation. In plain English, it just means this: when your identity gets folded into a role, a uniform, or a group, your usual sense of "this is who I am" gets quieter. And when that inner voice gets quiet, your usual restraints get quiet too. You've probably felt a small version of this yourself. Have you ever noticed how differently you act in a work uniform versus your weekend clothes? Or how a username with no face attached lets you say something you'd never say to someone in person? The costume changes the behavior. The role writes the script, and your brain just performs it. Zimbardo wasn't the only one to find this. Just 10 years earlier, a researcher named Stanley Milgram ran a different experiment, one that asked a different question. How far would an ordinary person go if someone in a position of authority told them to keep going? In Milgram's setup, participants believed they were administering electric shocks to another person every time that person answered a question wrong. The shocks supposedly increased in intensity with every mistake. The person being shocked wasn't actually being hurt. That part was staged. But the participant didn't know that. All they knew was that a calm man in a lab coat kept saying 4 words: "Please continue the experiment." Before the study, psychologists predicted that almost no one would go all the way to the highest, most dangerous shock level. 65% did. Not because they were cruel, because someone with perceived authority told them it was fine, and that was enough to override their own instincts. Authority didn't ask them to become a different person. It just asked them to stop checking in with the person they already were. So here's the question underneath both of these studies. If power and authority can do this to a stranger in a lab in a matter of hours, what is it doing to you, slowly, in your actual life? More recent research gives an answer, and it's not comforting. A psychologist named Dasher Keltner has spent decades studying what he calls the power paradox. His research found something almost poetic in its cruelty. The qualities that get a person into power, empathy, collaboration, reading a room well, are often the first qualities that start to erode once they have it. Power doesn't just sit there, neutral, waiting to be used well or badly. It actively reshapes the brain's threat detection and empathy systems. People with more power start paying less attention to the emotional cues of people with less power. Not because they're villains, because their brain has quietly recalibrated who is worth paying attention to. There's a study that makes this almost uncomfortably visible. Researcher Paul Piff and his colleagues watched drivers at a busy 4-way intersection in California. They didn't ask anyone about their income. They didn't need to. They just watched the cars. Expensive vehicles were nearly 4 times more likely to cut off other drivers and pedestrians than cheaper ones. 4 times. Not because wealthy people are born ruder, because a small daily dose of status, even something as simple as driving a nicer car, quietly shifts how much someone feels they need to yield to anyone else. Notice what's happening across all three of these: a basement, a lab, an intersection, different decades, different methods, same pattern. Power doesn't wait for a villain to misuse it. It manufactures the conditions for ordinary people to misuse it, almost on schedule, almost like clockwork. This is the counterintuitive twist that most people get wrong. You probably grew up believing that power reveals character, that giving someone authority just shows you who they secretly were all along. But that's not what the research shows. Power doesn't reveal you. Power edits you. It edits your empathy first, your humility second, and your self-awareness last, which is exactly why the people changing the most are usually the last to notice it happening. Think about how fast this can show up in your own life. The moment you get a manager title, the moment you get more followers than the people you used to scroll alongside, the moment a stranger on the internet has no name and no face attached to your replies. Have you ever noticed your tone shift in a group chat the moment you became the admin? Have you ever caught yourself talking over a waiter, a cashier, a new hire, in a tone you'd never use with your boss? None of that makes you a bad person. It makes you a person sitting inside the same psychological machinery that Zimbardo's guards sat inside in 1971. The machinery hasn't changed. Only the costumes have. This is also why the most dangerous version of power is never the kind that announces itself. It's the small, quiet kind. The kind that comes with a new title, a few extra likes, a slightly nicer car, a slightly bigger office, a group of people who now have to listen to you because of where you sit, not because of what you say. That kind of power slides in underneath your notice, and it starts rewriting the small daily decisions long before it touches the big ones. So what do you do with that, knowing it now? The researchers who study this don't suggest avoiding power altogether. That's neither realistic nor necessary. What they point to instead is awareness as the actual antidote. The people who keep their empathy intact after gaining power aren't the ones who deny that power changes anything. They're the ones who expect it to, and build small checks against it on purpose. They ask the people with less power in the room what they think, on purpose, even when no one would notice if they didn't. They notice their own impatience rising and treat it as a signal, not a personality trait. Awareness doesn't stop the machinery, but it slows it down enough for you to catch yourself mid-edit. Because that's really what's happening every time you're handed even a small amount of power over someone else. You're not becoming a worse person. You're entering a current that has been measured, again and again, in basements and labs and intersections, quietly pulling ordinary people in the same direction. The only difference between the people who get swept away by it and the people who don't is whether they knew the current was there at all. You get promoted on a Tuesday. By Thursday, something in you has already changed. But this time, you're the one who notices it first.